Okay, let's unpack this. We got some really interesting sources from you about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's the Maryland man who was, mistakenly deported to El Salvador a few months back. And now, well, things have taken another pretty dramatic turn. He's actually been returned to the U.S. But here's the twist. It wasn't to fix that original mistake. No, he's back to face some serious federal criminal charges. So our goal in this deep dive is to really go through the information you shared, pull out the key facts, and try to make sense of the legal and political angles here. It's quite a story.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And what's so striking is how this whole thing kicked off with what officials basically called an administrative error. Just, a slip up in the paperwork, supposedly. So back in March, Kilmar Abrego Garcia finds himself deported to El Salvador. Now, this is a huge deal because there was already a court order from 2019. That order specifically said he couldn't be deported there to El Salvador because there were real, credible fears he'd face gang violence. So this deportation, it wasn't just a personal issue for him, though obviously it was that too. It blew up pretty quickly into a serious standoff. We're talking the Trump administration on one side and the federal courts on the other. A federal judge, Paula Shinnis, she got involved and ordered the government, flat out, to get him back to the U.S. The whole thing escalated, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in April, they ruled the administration must facilitate his return. Though, interestingly, they didn't actually set a deadline. Now, during all this, administration officials were saying, they couldn't bring him back. Their reason, he was technically in the custody of El Salvador.
But that stance seemed a bit shaky, especially when you heard comment from people like President Trump himself, sort of suggesting otherwise. And this whole sequence, the mistaken deportation, the court orders, the government's seeming reluctance to comply it, really set off alarm bells for legal experts. Concerns about, basic due process rights, the idea that you get fair treatment under the law, that you get your day in court before something like deportation happens.
Right, and that whole legal fight dragged on for months. Then, boom, last Friday, June 6th, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back on U.S. soil. But like you said, based on the sources, this wasn't about fixing the error or revisiting his immigration case. Not at all. Attorney General Pam Bondi actually announced his return. She made a point of thanking the Salvadoran president, Nayib Bukele, for cooperation. And the reason he's back, he's been indicted. Federal charges filed in the Middle District of Tennessee. 2 counts. Conspiracy to unlawfully transport illegal aliens for financial gain, and the act itself, unlawful transportation for financial gain. The indictment paints a picture of a conspiracy starting way back in 2016. It alleges Abrego Garcia and others moved, quote, thousands of undocumented people, and it claims many of them were MS-13 members or associates. Now, that's a claim Abrego Garcia and his family strongly deny. Just to be clear, this alleged operation, it involved moving people from Texas up to Maryland and other states, apparently over 100 times. And they supposedly used fake cover stories, like pretending the migrants were heading to construction jobs to, avoid suspicion from law enforcement. The indictment mentions unnamed co-conspirators, too. There's a CC6, described as a primary source of supply. There's a CC1, allegedly picking people up near the border and handling money. And a CC2, who supposedly manage migrants' cell phones during transit, maybe to control communication. It even connects that primary source, CC6, to that awful incident back in 2021 in Mexico, where a truck overturned and, tragically, over 50 migrants died. And for Abrego Garcia himself, the indictment points to a specific incident, a traffic stop in Tennessee, November 2022. He was driving a Suburban with 9 passengers, none with ID or luggage. But at the time, he was just warned about an expired license. No smuggling charges then. So bringing him back specifically for these criminal charges now, after everything with the mistaken deportation, it's a really sharp turn.
It absolutely is. And predictably, this focus on criminal charges upon his return has triggered some very, very strong reactions. You got different sides digging in. Attorney General Pam Bondi, for instance, publicly said he returned to face justice. She emphasized the indictment's allegations, including smuggling children. Then you have DHS Secretary Kristi Noem using even tougher language. She called him an, MS-13 gang member, human trafficker, and serial domestic abuser. She also criticized the media and Democrats, basically accusing them of defending him. And a statement from the Trump administration echoed that, calling him an illegal alien terrorist, gang member, and human trafficker, and again accusing opponents of siding with a criminal. But then you look at the other perspective. Abrego Garcia's lawyer, Simon Seneval-Moshenberg, he called the charges straight up an abuse of power. His argument is that the administration is just playing games with the legal system. Instead of fixing their mistake, the deportation error, they've pivoted to criminal charges. He insists his client's case belongs in immigration court, not criminal court. His point really hammers on due process. You get a chance to defend yourself before you're punished. He feels that was totally bypassed by the deportation. And there's a really telling detail that came out from sources familiar with the case. Ben Schrader, who was the chief of the Justice Department's criminal division in Nashville, that's where these charges were filed. He reportedly resigned. The reporting suggests it was because he had concerns the case was being pushed for political reasons. He even posted something on LinkedIn later about doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. That hints at some potential internal conflict over this prosecution. Meanwhile, you have someone like Senator Chris Van Hollen, who sees the return differently. He views it as the administration finally, caving to pressure to follow court orders and respect due process. He stressed that for him, the fundamental issue here is about constitutional rights, regardless of who the individual is. Oh, and one more point separate from the indictment, prosecutors filed a detention memo. And in that memo, they included an allegation from a co-conspirator claiming Abrego Garcia was involved in a murder back in El Salvador. That wasn't in the indictment, but it's out there now.
Wow. Okay, so with all that swirling around, what's the immediate situation? Where does the case stand right now? Well, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was in a Tennessee courtroom Friday evening, right after he got back, and federal prosecutors immediately asked the judge to keep him detained before trial. No bail. Their argument is that he is both a danger to the community and a flight risk. And the potential penalties here, if he were convicted at trial, are staggering. The law says maximum 10 years in prison for each alien transported in the conspiracy. Since the indictment talks about thousands of people over years, well, you do the math. A conviction could theoretically mean a sentence longer than anyone could serve. Now, back in that original Maryland case, the one about the mistaken deportation, the Justice Department lawyers have already filed paperwork. They're basically saying, okay, he's back, we fulfilled the court's order, so that case should be dismissed now, it's moot. But things are still pretty uncertain. Even with these criminal charges front and center, officials had hinted before he returned. They hinted that they might still try to deport him again, maybe to a third country this time, or even try to legally challenge that original 2019 court order protecting him from deportation to El Salvador. So if he's convicted on these charges, the process would likely be serve the sentence here in the US and then face potential deportation proceedings again. So when you step back, this is just such a layered case, isn't it? It starts with what's called an administrative slip-up, leads to this major court battle reaching the Supreme Court, and then the resolution isn't fixing the mistake, but bringing him back to face these incredibly serious trafficking charges, all tangled up in intense political debate. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does this whole saga tell us about how immigration enforcement priorities, the court's definition of due process rights, and the tool of criminal prosecution can sometimes clash, or maybe even be used against each other? It's a lot to think about.